Hi everyone, this is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today I am taking a look at all three planets turning retrograde this week. We've got Jupiter turning retrograde, Saturn turning retrograde, Venus turning retrograde, happening all this week. Let me give you a look at it first, and then I'm going to try to answer the question that everyone always asks when you get a bunch of planets retrograde at the same time, which is, what does it mean that so many planets are retrograde all at the same time? So I'm going to give a few different answers to this because there isn't just one answer, and hopefully some demos that will be helpful for you as well. So first of all, let's just take account of what's happening. So let's see here. So on Monday of this week, you can see that Saturn is stationing, right? You get the little S right up above Saturn here. So that's Saturn stationing on Monday. Go forward one day onto Tuesday and look at, oh, look, there's Venus. And Venus is stationing on Monday. And then you go forward yet another day. And oh, look, on Wednesday, Jupiter is stationing. By this time, Saturn has also turned retrograde. You can see the little RX above Saturn right there. By the next day, on Thursday, you're going to see Venus having turned retrograde. And then by Friday, go forward one more day, then Jupiter's retrograde. So it is the week of three planets turning retrograde. And again, inevitably, I get the question, what does it mean? Understandably, people look at that and they go, oh my gosh, it's got to mean something. So let me start off by saying a few things about retrogrades generally, and then I'm going to pop the chart back up and give you an example of how to read something like this. So first of all, retrogrades are a part of the normal course of a planet's motion. They go backward and forward and forward and backward like that. They go forward through the zodiac, they stop, they go backward, they stop, they go forward. And all of the planets except for the sun and the moon are doing that. So in general, it's not a big deal if a planet is retrograde. It's not like unheard of. It's not uncommon. It's very common. But there's sometimes we go from giving retrogrades like a special status that maybe they don't deserve to also then really getting excited if a bunch of planets are retrograde. We think it means something in general. And I want to use an analogy that I think should make sense to you. If you have ever read tarot before, hopefully this analogy will click. So let's say that you have a 6-card tarot spread. And in that 6-card tarot spread, 3 of the 6 cards are reversed, which means the cards are flipped upside down. Now, some people don't even work with reversals. Fine, I get it. But let's say that you work with reversals and you throw a 6-card spread and you've got 3 cards that are turned upside down. As a reader, that may or may not mean anything, right? Because reversals in tarot are just a way of giving you more specific and detailed information about that card and its symbolism and its placement in the spread. Relative to other placements in the spread, that could mean something very significant or not very significant. It depends on the context. It depends on the question. And so you can't ever just say that reversals mean some general thing, even in tarot. Reversals might mean that the normal indication of the card is inverted or turned, or a shadow side of the card is coming out, or some kind of reversal regarding the card is coming out. There are many different ways, in other words, of looking at reversals in tarot. There are many different ways of looking at retrogrades in astrology. So you can't say that a single planet retrograde, let alone 3 planets retrograde, only mean one thing, or they only point to one thing. And you can't do that for everyone. You can't just like, oh, everyone's going to experience this coming week because 3 retrogrades just means this for everyone. You'll all be experiencing this. No, so context matters a whole lot, which is why we have birth charts. If we didn't need birth charts, if we didn't need some way of anchoring the symbolism of the heavens and the unique karma of the individual, we wouldn't have birth charts, right? So that's not to say that we can't say some general things about 3 planets turning retrograde, which we will do today. In fact, I'll be looking at the Ching a little bit later in today's talk to give you a sense of what 3 retrograde planets might mean all at once in a more collective sense. But first of all, it's just to say that if you were to have a 6-card tarot spread and 3 cards turned up reverse, depending on which positions they're in, depending on which cards they are, depending upon the question asked and how the positions in the spread relate to one another based on the question that is asked. All of that is contextual stuff that tarot readers pick up on really intuitively over many years of reading cards for people. So similarly, astrologers will look at a series of retrogrades happening in someone's birth chart if I was sitting with a client, and that's gonna have a different look and feel for everyone based on their own natal karma. And so it's really hard to read any individual retrograde or any individual planetary placement in a vacuum. It's just astrology abhors a vacuum, Uh, but what to speak of trying to read again 3 retrogrades all at once. So that's my first. I know some people are going, that's such a cop out, like give us a real answer, but that is the answer. And that's why you're not going to find, I mean, I could make something up that would sound really nice, like we're all going to go through a time of inward turning reevaluation, society is going to level up next month by the time all the retrogrades have set in, and like that's just not true. So these kinds of really stereotypical kind of cliches about like, well, a bunch of planets going retrograde mean like, oh, we're really in for it, or oh, we're really going to level up, or what, like stuff like that. It's generic, and in my opinion, it's very poor astrology. So think of the tarot analogy if that helps. Now, there are some general things that we can say, and I'll get to those and how we get to those in a minute. But first, I want to give you an example of how to apply something like this and get the most out of it with your natal chart. So I'm going to put this back up on the screen and give you an example that I think will make sense. So let's just pretend for a minute that we're dealing with someone who is a Virgo rising, meaning their whole sign house configuration starts with Virgo in the first, Libra in the second, Scorpio in the third, and so on around the wheel. This is your whole sign house setup if you're a Virgo rising. So let's say that that's you. Now, in ancient astrology, transits are not all made equally, which means there could be 3 retrograde planets, and literally it won't mean anything, because we look at things like who are the perfected years of the lords of the year, or which planets are pronounced in your solar return or your monthly lunar return or your progress chart. There's so many different techniques that we have in both ancient and modern astrology that help us to hone in on which planets we should really be paying attention to at what times. So not all retrogrades are also built equal, in the sense that this Virgo rising chart could very well feature Venus's retrograde as of major importance in the person's life right now, whereas Saturn's retrograde and Jupiter's retrograde, maybe they don't mean anything. Or some other individual planet could mean a lot and the other two don't. So that's just, again, to show you how flexible and variable it is. This is divination, after all, where we are, it's not a cookie cutter kind of practice. So, all right, but let's just say that this was someone's birth chart. You have the planet of good fortune in the house of career, Venus, who's been there for a while. Let's say just kind of pouring on the good looking, fun, enjoyable stuff in the career house. Whether that's creativity or success or an aura of pleasant or happy, productive, fortunate things happening in the career. Those are some significations, very basic, of Venus in the career house. So you're cruising in your career. Saturn, in the meantime, has entered your 6th house, a place that was associated with very hard work and oftentimes grueling work, and even sickness and different kinds of struggles that might come up. But let's just use one of the particular significations of the 6th. We could do a whole talk on the 6th, right? But let's just say that we're talking about that really hard work that often comes out of the 6th house. Well, Saturn in the 6th, in its own sign in Aquarius, would be very productive in the 6th house, but could be very exhausting at the same time. Kind of like that period of time where you're, cramming for the SAT or in high school. You're working really hard, you end up with the grades, you end up with a good score, but, maybe you got mono along the way, or maybe you just ended up being really exhausted and having no social life for a while, or right spectrum of things that could come with that hard work that may be really depleting or difficult. So anyway, let's say that you've been experiencing, now we'll put them together and we'll say you've been experiencing fortunate things in your career due to hard work, discipline, and focus. And it's been a little grueling and taxing, but things have been going along nicely. All of a sudden, boom, boom, these 2 planets go retrograde. And now all of a sudden, your job is shutting down because of COVID-19, or your job is cutting your pay, or the job is even letting you go. And suddenly while you were coasting along doing really well, now suddenly there's a delay, a setback, or an unexpected reversal or challenge that comes up, whatever it could be, from ranging from relatively minor to relatively major. We're just giving some examples. Natal chart dependent, right? So then you're sitting there going like, okay, so there's two retrogrades in houses that are connected by a trine, meaning they should be influencing one another. And you could apply this in your own birth chart simply by looking at the whole sign house of Gemini and the whole sign house of Aquarius. Wherever those two houses are, think of the topics as being connected, and think of Saturn and Venus working together pretty cooperatively, but then suddenly hitting a moment where there's a turn of fortune, a reversal, a setback, a delay, a change of circumstance that shifts the narrative somehow. So those two areas are connected. Now, how about the third area? Well, in this case, we have Jupiter. Jupiter's in its own sign, or excuse me, in its own house, right? Let me revise that. Jupiter is not connected to Venus or Saturn by aspect, right? It's not seeing them. It's kind of walled off from that trine area, not connected by aspectual line of sight. It's in aversion to both signs. But it's also in its fall in Saturn's sign. So it has some overlap by Saturn by virtue of being in Saturn's domicile. So I use a little square there to show you that Venus, although Jupiter is not having an aspect to Saturn, shares in some of the significations of Saturn because Saturn is its host. So what would this look like in your life? Well, let's say, for example, let's come up with two different scenarios. Let's say that, well, Jupiter is in the house of children, right? And so let's use some of the significations of children. Well, this news that suddenly the good fortune that you were coasting along with at work, because of hard work, is not only is it set back and delayed, but now you've got a big curveball thrown at you because this could really impact being able to pay for your kids' daycare, or being able to pay for your kids' preschool in the fall, or maybe you just got pregnant and now you're thinking, oh my God, I've got a baby due, and I was working my way up in work and I had a secure thing going, and now everyone's got laid off, and now I'm really worried about what's going to happen with my pregnancy. These are all stories that I know they sound a little dark, but these are real things that people go through. Jupiter's in its fall in the house of children. So this kind of, I was doing so good, and then all of a sudden, we got told that they're gonna cut my hours in half, and I'm not sure what I'm gonna do because I've got a kid coming. So you see how like all three of those areas get hit at once. Well, let's use a slightly more constructive interpretation. So let's say that you have grown children, and let's say at the same time, that your hours get cut back, that suddenly your child is without a job and they're running out of their ability to pay for their rent, and they say, can I move back home? Why would that be a thing? Well, because look at what Jupiter does. Jupiter rules the fourth house here, the house of home and family, and is in the fifth house of children in its fall retrograde, disposed of by the same energy, in connection with the same energies that are happening for you. So your hours got cut back, and then boom, your kid also has a problem with their money or finances due to COVID-19 and wants to come home and live with you. Fourth house ruler in the fifth, retrograde in its fall, disposed of by Saturn in the sixth. So there's karmic overlap between you, your child, and the cutback at work. These things happen all the time. People sometimes, when it happens to you, here's what you say. You go, oh my God, it feels like I'm getting hit all at once with all of this stuff. And we know that it's connected. We know that it's part of our destiny, part of our karma, but we're not sure why it's happening in these different areas simultaneously. And that is deeply mysterious as to why certain kinds of things are sort of synchronistically connected to one another. But at the same time, when you look at something like three planets turning retrograde in three different houses, they're connecting a lot of different topical areas at once. And so it's also possible that if you look at your natal chart in particular at the houses of Gemini, Aquarius, and Capricorn, that you're going to see these intermingling themes, and there could be different kinds of reversals, setbacks, delays, turns or twists of plot, twists of fate that they may be happening in slightly different areas or different ways, but they're actually all kind of connected in this way. So I think this is the really interesting thing about studying astrology. Anyway, so that's just an example of how specific it can be. And, there would be probably slightly more positive examples that you could find. But the reason that I also went a little bit heavier with this one is because you've got Jupiter in its fall right now, turning retrograde, disposed of by a Saturn that's now weakening via its retrograde. So the Saturn Jupiter connection is a little heavier right now. Venus is going to do a little bit better because Mercury is going to be in Venus's sign and in its own, or excuse me, Mercury is going to be in the same sign with Venus while in its rulership in Gemini. So Venus has a little bit more protection and should still be able to deliver relatively good results, even if there are some setbacks in that Gemini area of your chart. Anyway, remember, retrogrades mean reversals. They mean delays. They mean twists of the plot in the movie, right? So suddenly you're going in one direction and whoop, the path opens up in front of you and you have to, there's a crossroad, there's a fork in the road. You got to take a different route. So that's generally what they mean. And 3 at once are going to mostly depend on your birth chart and what the context of those retrogrades mean. Okay. Now I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to say absolutely zero about what's happening collectively. So I did cast the I Ching and I'm going to add a few last thoughts on that. So the I Ching I use it frequently when it comes to things happening in the collective. And I say, just like, where's the Tao flowing right now? And what is something that we could be aware of sort of collectively with regard to any particular transit, especially those that maybe I'm having a little bit more trouble pinning down. So with this one, 3 retrogrades all at once, I'm going, okay, this is one where I could use some advice from the I Ching. So I asked, what should we know about 3 planets turning retrograde this week? What's important to keep in mind? And the first hexagram that came back was number 3, which is sometimes called difficulty at the beginning. I'm going to summarize the meaning because, the I Ching is really dense and you could spend a lot of time going into any given hexagram. So I'll just give a quick summary. Difficulty at the beginning, number 3, is sort of like saying, when something is being born, it's often kind of chaotic and messy. But eventually order comes in. Eventually there's challenges in the beginning. Like I've been present for both my daughters being born, and, their birth was, it was chaotic. It was primal. It was beautiful. It was chaotic all at once. And I'm sure women out there listening who have given birth would agree that although it's beautiful, that there can be, nature is, is roaring and there's contraction and it's super intense. So at any rate, difficulty at the beginning is like a way of saying right when you're trying to get started with something, you're often beset with difficulties and chaos feels like it's taking over. I remember about 10 years ago, my wife and I were starting our yoga studio. And then there was a few reiterations of our yoga studio where we moved into new locations and we actually had to construct a whole yoga studio from scratch. And I remember when we were building the yoga studio, we were doing the construction, we had to push back the launch date, the open date, twice and by about a month each time because things kept coming up and more chaos and unplanned for, mitigating or not mitigating factors, but, different kinds of delays and setbacks came up that basically threw a little bit of a wrench in the wheels of our plan. And I remember at the time really having to resist the urge to just plow through them because at almost every step there was a sense of like, well, I could just go to IKEA or, like Kmart or something, and I could get some cheap thing and, try to replace it and just do it like this. We'll just throw it together. And I'm not trying to be a snob or anything, but it's like, that thing, that where it's like that, where it's like, you're like, well, I'll just go get this cheap thing, replace it. Cause I just want to be done. You know what I mean? And that was what it was like. And we had to keep resisting that and just be in the chaos and be in the delay and be in the labor. And 3 planets turning retrograde at once could very much be like that, where we're feeling the birth of spring for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, or you're feeling the urge to create something or start something. And, you know, 3 planets turning retrograde all at once will certainly create a little storm of chaos that you have to deal with for a while. There may be some delays. There may be, you know, expect the unexpected. I know people hate when you say that, but with 3 planets turning retrograde, it could be that there's some chaos at the beginning. Because they also, setbacks or delays or the unexpected coming up and challenging you to revise your plans, all would be totally normal. And that's what this hexagram refers to. Now, the third line of hexagram 63 was changing. I recommend, by the way, another cool I Ching website that I like is ijing123.com. That's a cool one. Anyway, the third line of this hexagram speaks to, here we go. I'll read it to you. Chasing a deer with no guide and entering the forest, a wise person evaluates the situation. It is better to give up, as going forward will be resented. A hunter is running after the prey. He enters a forest but has no guide. The forest is dim, obscure, full of uncertainty. He should carefully consider the situation. The outcome is clear and depends on whether or not he's willing to accept the situation and give up. Chasing a deer with no guide is indulging in the hunt and is being led by the animal. A wise person should give up. Going forward will be resented and plunge one into plight. This line speaks to biding one's time rather than rushing forward to complete something. The changing hexagram leads to number 63, which is called after completion. A way of thinking about this sequence would be saying, resist the urge to rush to completion. Because there will be things that will come up along the way that will be regrettable. And that's a repeated lesson of the I Ching everywhere. But let me read the text here. To enhance oneself and bide one's time, the future is unknown, hard to control, and without a guide. This is risky, so one should consider all the unfavorable factors. It's better to give up, since continuing forward will cause resentment. Resentment means that if a correction is not made timely when there is a fault, then the situation will lead to calamity. One day, when this line changes to yang, acting with full momentum and a guide in front, the hexagram will become 63, completion. So I read this as a way of saying, look, there's a creative process that's happening right now, and something new is being born, and we might, but the 3 retrogrades coming up might mean a period of chaos that is very normal for the beginning stages of birthing something. Remember that. Don't forget that. Because, like line 3, if you try to plunge forward without the correct momentum or without a guide, chaos will ensue. It's a weird thing, but I knew it. Like when we were building that yoga studio, I just looked at my wife and I was like, if we rush these details that mean something to us, that have to do with our aesthetic or that are spiritually relevant to us in the way that we're building this yoga studio, that if we rush past those things, it's going to set in motion a chain of action that continues to amplify the feeling that getting across the finish line is better than doing it in the right way. And so that's what this sequence is sort of about. And so when these 3 retrogrades come up simultaneously, it can be like, whoa, you know, pull back, change of course, those difficulties that pop up and challenge your patience because you just want to be done. You just want to finish. This is a theme right now, given our moon cycle. I talked about it last week, the full moon in Scorpio with Mars, Mercury square Mars plunging into Pisces, the last quarter moon. If you go back and watch my full moon in Scorpio video, you'll hear me mentioning the exact same thing, that there's this aura of like, stick with something. If you go back to my Saturn and Pluto panel talk that I hosted in January, one of the things that a lot of speakers said was sticking with something, persevering through something, patience, determination, slowness, even when it feels like you're sort of being cooked. This is alchemy happening. So don't rush through it. Trust that there is a kind of creative chaos at the beginning of fresh new chapters. Don't be like the person that plunges after their desires without a guide, without a plan, without a mindful step-by-step way of getting there. And when things come up all at once and sort of challenge us, all it means is that there is a slightly different path that we need to take. And if we're mindful, then we'll find it. And what we accomplish will not only, it won't just be, oh, I accomplished something. It'll be that I've changed my consciousness as I've gone along, which means then that the universe gives us more things to do, more interesting adventures to have. And just like hexagram 63 is about crossing a great stream, you cross the stream, you get across to the other side. I'm there, yay, right? But if all it was about was crossing the stream, then when you get across, you won't have the consciousness necessary to maintain whatever you achieved or to take up the next task, because you'll be sitting there reveling in having accomplished something. So similarly, we could have rushed the yoga studio. We could have just been like, yeah, it'll be so great to open. Won't that be awesome? Yeah, but then we'll have lost the consciousness we need to keep the studio going in the right direction, because we were impatient. We cared more about finishing than about the consciousness with which we did every little thing. So I think that the meaning of those three retrogrades at once is tapping into this kind of this flow of the Tao, chaos at the beginning of creation, and of the patience needed not to persist when chaos comes up, but to find a new way of flowing through or flowing around to completion. So that's what I've got for you guys. I hope that this was interesting. Remember, I have my courses coming up in the middle of June. My Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic course starts on June 14th, Sundays at noon, 30 classes on the year. Great class in Ancient Astrology. Got 12 guest lectures, optional homework, quizzes, tons of bonus material, and it's a really fun class. We host live clients in the class after we get through the theoretical components. You get to see live readings being done. It's a great time to study right now because the veil is a little bit thinner. People are much more aware of the reality of karmic forces in the world. I've heard more people in the past few weeks say it feels like we're in a collective karmic sort of crisis, or it feels karmic right now. And that's true, and also means that people are just a little bit more open to studying the ancient science of karma. So if it appeals to you, please feel free to sign up. We've got need-based tuition for people who are struggling with COVID-19. You can check that out on my website, nightlightastrology.com. Early bird rate is in effect. Save a lot of money that way, and we have payment plans for regular tuition as well. So hope to see some of you in class soon, and thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you're having a good week. Bye.